Hello, greetings from Rockaway Park. Welcome to the Sounds of Unrest podcast with me, Steve Lake. Today we're talking to Marta, who I consider to be the beating heart of Rockaway. So let's just dive straight into it.
Hello.
Hello. Could you tell us something about your life at Rockaway?
Yes, when I first came here, which is probably about 11 years ago now, I had no idea what I could do or if I could set anything up here or what my job would be, activities or anything like that. And Rockaway as such didn't exist by then. And when I started to see Mark and started coming here and then eventually moved here, Mark only started sort of turning the yard from the van breaking business into sort of the Rockaway that it is today. So the first thing I did here in terms of a role or a job was to start renting out rooms on Airbnb, and for a few years that was pretty much my job. And then I started helping Mark with his accounting, even when he still had the van business, and carry on doing that today. So then when the Rockaway evolved more and more and more stuff was going through Rockaway, I just naturally took that role on of being the admin person, the sort of accounting person, bookkeeping person. And when we established Rockaway as a company, me and Mark both became directors, so we're both directors of the company, and we ran Rockaway together.
So it's a kind of joint vision.
Yeah, you could say that. Although Mark is the visionary, I will not claim that role. And I'm sort of like back office, behind the scenes kind of person.
You were involved in the Rio's cinema in Hackney before, so you have a background in arts anyway.
Yeah, so I was a front of house manager at the Rio Cinema for 15 years. I suppose a lot of the skills that I was able to gain there, I could bring over here in terms of, running things and organising things. And
one of the main things people see you doing is the vegan kitchen.
Yes, so that's something I sort of fell into my lap as well. There was a person here initially who ran a vegan cheese making business, and Mark built a commercial kitchen for that purpose. And then we thought, well, we have a commercial kitchen on site. We may as well be serving food. Initially, I wasn't involved in that, but then when Mel left Rockaway, then I took over the cafe, mainly because there was nobody else to do it.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I learned on the job, and I learned more and more, and I learned sort of different recipes, and I learned how to run a commercial kitchen and how to run a cafe, and it all sort of grew from that. But I had no experience at all in cooking or running a restaurant.
Yeah. Presumably you had some sort of interest in food and where it comes from, because you've been a vegan for many years.
Yeah, I think for vegans, vegetarians, that's a natural part and parcel of being a vegan or vegetarian, that we just have to do a little bit more research and be a little bit more interested and careful what goes in our food and how to make it. But mostly because it's probably very different these days, but when we were kids and decided to stop eating meat, there was nobody else who could cook for you, because nobody else knew what to cook for you or understood what they cooked for you. So you just had to learn how to cook for yourself if you wanted to eat.
You grew up in Poland, is that right?
Yes.
Were you already a vegan before you came to England?
I I was on and off. It was much harder in Poland because there was no meat alternative or cheese or dairy or anything like that. And if they were usually either very expensive or only available in big cities. So
Right, and you grew up in the country?
I grew up in a small town, but also when I started travelling as a young punk, quite often going to different countries was very difficult to stick to a vegan diet, when you're on tour. So I believe that the vegan diet is the right thing to do, but the sort of practicalities of it sometimes were just too difficult. And so it wasn't until I moved to England when I was 22 that I became a fully vegan.
How did you get involved in the sort of punk scene then in Poland?
I met some people in school who had a distro, DIY distro, and sort of that interested me. And I made friends, and they were inviting me to gigs. They were tabling at and stuff like that, and I was drawn to it. I was drawn to it. I grew up in a small town in northern Poland, like 10 miles from Russian border.
Okay, yeah.
And I can probably say I had a very happy childhood, even though I grew up in communism, which, a lot of people think it was misery.
So you didn't grow up thinking, oh, I'm growing up in this miserable, cruel, oppressive regime and I have no freedom?
Not at all, and it might be a strange thing to hear to some people, but I really had a very happy childhood, and now as a grown adult person, when I look back, I don't actually believe that socialism is necessarily an evil setup, for instance, as a child, I had free education, free holidays. My parents were given money to send us on holiday and go on holiday pretty much every year, every summer holiday. Everybody had a job. There was no homelessness. Everybody had somewhere to live. Obviously, there were divisions in the society, as there would be anywhere, but I feel there was a lot less inequality than there is in a capitalist system. Obviously, the means of production were state-owned, so a lot of people worked for big companies that were state-owned. You could call it propaganda, but it was really obvious and pushed this idea of physical work was a virtue. And, whether you were a tractor driver, whether you were a male or female tractor driver, there was a whole campaign to bring more female tractor drivers, or anything like that, because, women were seen as equal to men in terms of physical work. Maybe not in a coal mine, but certainly on, state farms or factories, or, the work that could be as easily done by a man as by a woman. And equality was definitely pushed, and it was felt that it was pushed. It didn't just happen naturally. It was definitely you could feel that the state were doing it through their messaging.
What was your impression growing up as a child of the West, or did you never think of the West?
We were always made believe, and I can't tell you who was making us believe that, but somehow I suppose at this point, when I think back about it, I can't tell you where that messaging was coming from. But we were made to believe that the West is this colourful, beautiful paradise that's untouchable. We didn't have passport that would allow us to go to the West, for instance, so we could never visit it.
Yeah.
We were only allowed to go to USSR or DDR or Yugoslavia.
You grew up in this country town, and something about punk rock attracted you.
So it's not like I got attracted to the music and then started going to gigs, and then started to, it was the other way around. First I met people who were organising the gigs and doing the distros.
Well, that's because the people are great. It's just the music that's dreadful.
And also the communist regime started falling down, when I was 15, 16, when I was becoming more aware of the world and all the political engagement of the whole society, really, because even though, for instance, probably the reason I had a happy childhood is because my parents were just like average Joes, they had nothing to do with the Communist Party or any activism or anything like that, so they were left alone, and we just lived a simple life. So I guess for that reason, our family were not impacted by the regime, in a negative way that a lot of people suffered from. And I thought that, you'd be wrong not to recognise that, a lot of people did suffer.
Why were they suffering?
Imprisonment and...
For what?
For their political activism against the communist regime.
Okay, then, so you started to travel about initially when you joined these punk rockers.
So I started hanging out, at gigs and with people who, do industrials, organising gigs, and that put me straight in a scene that was quite political. So from that, sort of vegetarianism and anti-fascism and like anti-homophobia, all those sort of, all those values that I suppose you would associate with DIY punk.
Yeah.
And I very clearly remember a distinction between us, DIY punks, and punk rockers.
Oh, so that was a distinction.
Yeah, and the punk rockers were just people who were dressing up as punks and getting off their faces and causing trouble, while we were the people who wanted to change the world.
Yeah. Always the way.
And it didn't feel like it was the same scene. So for instance, I never had a Mohican.
No. So you travelled about with groups in East Europe?
Yeah, so during communism, everything was censored, and there was a quite famous big punk festival that was happening for many years in Poland called Jarocin. It started during communism, under the Communist Party, but at the time it was very regulated. So, for instance, every band who wanted to perform there had to send in their songs, and they had to be approved, and they could only sing those very songs on stage.
Right.
And stuff like that. And, some bands were refused being able to play there and stuff like that.
This was Polish bands and bands from other parts of Europe?
I can't think of foreign bands playing the festival. It was very it was Polish. It was only from sort of when communism fell that the freedom of speech was introduced into Poland, and what we see today, like DIY punk bands could just perform in a club. Or also, during communism, if you want a musician, you needed to have a license to perform. You can't just go and perform. You needed you needed a state license to be able to perform. The first years of the 90s, when it was felt like we're getting all this freedom, and all of a sudden, you could either go abroad or people from abroad could come to Poland easily. There were quite a few bands from Britain and Germany and other places that started coming over, and they were very, very popular, obviously, because the Polish punk scene was starved of foreign influence.
How did the Polish people know about the punk scene, and particularly something as underground as the DIY punk scene? Were there records on sale legitimately at that time?
No, everything was bootlegged. People have pen pals. Everything like all the communication was happening through writing letters and sending parcels, copying tapes. You were able to tune into Radio Europe, I believe, where I think maybe some punk bands were played.
And what about fanzines? Were there fanzines getting in?
I don't remember seeing any foreign fanzines before the 90s. As soon as the market opened up, pretty much everything started being available, whether it's Profane Existence or there's a famous one, Heart Attack as well, which was more hardcore from America.
What made you decide to come to England?
Having had, a happy childhood and being all right where I was, at the same time, I never felt that where I am is forever. I never felt I belonged there. I always had this underlying feeling that when I grow up, I'm going to end up somewhere else. I had no idea where, and I had no idea where those feelings were coming from. But I just felt like it was only temporary where I was at the time. And I remember that feeling being just like overwhelming. So pretty much everything what I was doing there was only for now, but going forward, I'm going to be somewhere else.
Right, and you didn't really know where that was. You just
no, I had no plans. I had no plans to leave Poland. I never really wanted to move away from Poland. I had my family there, my friends, my life.
So did you think you'd end up in the big city like Warsaw?
Probably,
or Gdansk?
Yeah. I was always drawn into places that there's stuff going on, where there's loads going on, where there's loads. I always loved crowds. I always loved being amongst people. I think one of the first jobs that I thought that I would do was being like a journalist. I would just go to a war zone or somewhere with something going on and report from that.
Yeah.
Or I just wanted to be in the middle of the action all the time.
Yeah. I think that's quite common with young people.
And a small town in Poland wasn't that place.
Yeah.
I always thought I was going to end up somewhere else, and naturally I was drawn to. I read a lot of anthropology books. I always was interested in other cultures and other languages. And
did you do well at school?
I did do well at school.
Always do your homework?
I didn't like school, but I did well at school.
Right, yeah.
I always loved learning. I didn't like school because I didn't feel it was teaching me enough, basically.
Yeah.
And I was always hungry for knowledge.
And travelling is a way that you gain knowledge, isn't it?
I felt that was very holistic and wholesome way of learning about the world. For instance, one of the first foreign places we started going to was Croatia, just after the Balkan War. They had punk festivals there, and the most famous being the Monte Paradiso punk festival in Pula in northern Croatia. So we would just hitchhike there, for instance, from Poland, with our big backpack full of distro stuff.
Right.
Just arrive in Pula, set up a stall at the festival, and people were just so friendly because they were not used to seeing outsiders or foreign people, because it was still seen as a war zone or somewhere dangerous to go to. So the local people were very, very happy to see a foreigner, and they were super friendly. They'd offer you a bed, they offer you dinner, they look after you. They just wanted you to enjoy yourself in their country.
So you were travelling about, and then that brought you to England?
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Right.
I met John Active. At some point, he said, I don't know, I can't remember how it happened, I must say. But one thing led to another. He said, you can come to England for a bit if you want,
Yeah.
We'll give you a ride.
And did you plan to stay in England then, or you were just visiting?
No, I just took the offer on. I was like, I'll come to England for a bit, check it out.
Yeah. And you were very involved in active distribution.
Yeah. That happened naturally, so I came over to England and I stayed. And as I said, it's not because I wanted to move away from Poland or I wanted to live in England in particular. It's just where my life led me, you could call it. And then because of John, I ended up in London.
How did you feel about London after growing up in Poland? Did it seem exciting?
It was exciting because, from what I was saying earlier, I was just so drawn to big places and places where there's loads going on. So I was 20, 21, 22, so at the time where you don't want to go out all the time, you want to experience everything, and you want to see every gig. And the brilliant thing about London was that you really didn't have to go anywhere else, and you would experience everything, because every band that was touring in Britain would come to London. I also loved, another thing I loved about London was its multi-ethnicity.
Is that different to Poland?
I think it's a rhetorical
He
question.
says knowingly.
Let's put it this way. I vividly remember seeing the first black person ever in my life in Poland.
Right.
I can't remember exactly how old I was, but maybe I was like 7 or 8 or something like that.
The impression we're given here is that Poland and Eastern Europe generally is more intolerant of multi-ethnicity. Is that fair to say, or?
I'm not sure if intolerant is the right word. There's definitely a lot less cultures and ethnicities within the Polish society, but I'm not sure that's because Polish people are intolerant.
Yeah.
There's probably other factors to it. And there's obviously a mixture of nationalities and faiths to a certain extent. Much smaller mix than here, but the people from another countries or from another cultures or from another religions would still look the same as you know. So we didn't have any people of color that would that would live in Poland or any sort of groups of ethnic groups. Obviously, Jewish population before the Second World War was massive. There's a certain mix with the Orthodox,
the Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox.
So there are other cultures and religions, but they're very, very much in minority in the closer. So for instance, because I was in a border town, so we had a lot of more interaction with people over the border and stuff like that than somebody who would live more inside in Poland, further away from the borders. As I said, because from early age I was fascinated by other cultures and ethnicities. I loved London for that. I loved London for the fact that you could experience all that within one city, and to a huge extent it looked like those different cultures and ethnicities could live alongside each other.
I think generally they do in London, probably other big cities in England as well.
And that's something that was very encouraging to see and to witness.
How did you find it coming to deepest, darkest Somerset after the excitement and...
Well, it was another culture shock again. When I was in Poland, moving from a small town to a bigger city for a few years before I ended up in London. And then moving to London, you uproot your whole life. And because I've had experience with that, it was just another time. You uproot your life and you pretty much try to set it up again or from scratch, somewhere else. I must say, the older you are, the harder... the harder it gets. Also because it's much easier to make new friends, or when you're young and when there's more people your age or similar age who don't have families, are going out and looking for new friends or
Although we're in the middle of the countryside here, there's always stuff going on at Rockaway. Rockaway is always drawing people to these events.
Yes, it's like London.
Yeah, it is. It's
you don't have to leave it.
Annex of London. Presumably it wasn't like that when you first came here and it was still operating as a scrapyard.
Yeah, it was very different. It wasn't like that. But at the time, Mark was still playing with the mob, and we travelled with the mob a lot. So because of that, I still had a connection to sort of say my life in London, for instance, because we would still, see the same people or go to gigs, operate within the same scene, just from a different base.
How do you like Somerset?
Yeah, like as you say, when you're in London, you never feel like you want to be anywhere else in England or Britain. Having come here, I think it's great. It's beautiful. It's interesting. It's got a certain underbelly. and Bristol, even Bristol being a big city, it's still a nice city. And even say we are in a countryside, it doesn't feel like countryside. It's not just fields and pastures, is it? It's not the British countryside that a lot of people imagine. There's a lot of industry here, small industry, but obviously it has a huge industrial history. This place,
You're running the vegan cafe. Is one of the things that really attracts people to Rockaway.
I might be wrong, but I don't think it's because it's a vegan cafe. When the job landed in my lap, I made a decision that I'd run it as a vegan, as a vegan place, because I wasn't prepared to either cook or serve non-vegan food, and it obviously wasn't the best business decision to set up a vegan cafe in the middle of nowhere in an old quarry.
Yeah, it does seem a bit unlikely
in an English countryside. But I think, the sort of as Rockaway grew and the way it is now, even though we couldn't advertise more how open we are and inclusive, and we're open every day, a lot of people still don't know they could just come here, turn up, And I totally understand that to some people, the idea of going somewhere where they haven't been before, a little bit intimidating, where they don't know what to expect, or like sort of what goes on, or what they could do when they get here. So like having a cafe gives them that anchor, or, sort of reason to, well, at least we can go and have a cup of tea, and then we'll see what else goes on, or we can do or see. But that gives somebody a reason to make the trip, to make the decision to come.
I guess it's a place that people come to and then are introduced to those ideas and all sorts of other ideas.
Yeah, and veganism is one of those ideas, that sort of, for us, came from the DIY punk scene and our beliefs, and our values. Like in a funny way, when I was living, in Poland, like sort of doing my activism in Poland, and then in London with Active, and I was there for like 16, 17 years before I moved here. It almost feels like I was in a punk ghetto, you know, like, so all my friends were punks. I was socializing, I was going out to gigs. So it was normal that everybody was vegetarian or vegan or had the same values, like it wasn't until I came over here that people started to ask me, like, about my vegan diet, which I wasn't used to. I wasn't used to discussing it or answering questions, I was just a little bit taken aback. It was like, that's so strange that somebody's asking me about this.
Yeah.
So I feel, in a way, I've done a lot more campaigning from here than I ever did before. All of a sudden, a lot of people who, as you say, like, wouldn't have come across a vegan diet before, or certain values or ideas, because they came here, they naturally ask questions about it. But I'm not a campaigner in a way that I want to drum ideas into people's minds, So, for instance, I don't put vegan in front of everything I sell, like I sell food. I don't want to say it's vegan food all the time, because to me it's food. To me, like, non-vegan food is not food. So I believe that actually most people who come to the cafe, they're not vegan, or they come to the cafe because it is a vegan cafe. They come to the cafe because the cafe's here and it's affordable and it sells nice food. To me personally, like, a vegan diet is a huge part of your world belief, so I just live according to that belief, and if I can encourage somebody else to think along the same lines, I've done my job. I've done my job, like, I'm happy, I feel like I've made the world a better place. But doing it by offering something nice, as opposed to showing people pictures of slaughterhouses and telling them they're doing something wrong. Because I would not do that, although there's a place and space for that. We don't tend to plan, because that leaves us open to opportunities. We might have an idea of what we'd like to happen, but the way it has happened so far is mostly by seeing sort of who gets involved, what they bring to the table.
Do you grow much of what you sell in the...
More and more. When I was a child in Poland, and so my dad worked in a factory and my mum was a teacher. But when I was 9 years old, my dad bought a piece of land and quit his job in a factory and started growing stuff on the land. But also by doing that, he became like one of the first capitalists in the town, because he wasn't working for a state factory. He was working for himself, and then he had to employ people to help him. The reason I mention it is because, like, I feel like it was quite an education for me, because my dad used to explain to me his operation and how it works and how the systems work, and So I was learning about all that. So he was explaining his operation to me from, say, the business point of view, and I could understand that. And then I met a guy at school who had a DIY distro, and he called it non-profit. And I didn't understand that. I was very curious why somebody would do something for non-profit, because I was told that, like, when you run something, when you have a business, the natural thing is to grow it, and to make some profit on it. So why would you do something like a distro that you don't take any profit? So it was one of the things that I suppose fascinated me about the punk scene. Just like that concept of doing something just for the belief of doing it, other than for financial gain. So the business that my dad started was like a market garden business, and he set up some polytunnels and was growing vegetables and selling them. I was 10, 11 years old by the time it was established, so I was helping on the land, and I was doing that up until I left home, really. So I had a first-hand experience with growing food for sale, really.
Yeah. So are you slowly expanding the area here that you grow food?
So it was something. So I feel like growing food is in my DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's my grandparents had farms, so like I spent all my school holidays and Christmas and a lot of time on farms as well. So I just feels like being out with nature is like a huge part of my lifestyle. I just love being outdoors, and I'm not one of those people that just loves being outdoors doing nothing. I love being outdoors and have a job. I mean, I will go out and read a book for half an hour and enjoy myself, but if we had a warmer climate here, I'd be quite happily living outdoors, and cooking outdoors and doing everything. And so sort of gardening gives me a very good reason to be outdoors and feeling like it's productive and and beneficial. So I'm not just like doing it as a pleasure.
I mean, you and Mark have that in common, don't you? That you love to be doing things.
Yeah, and I believe it's a big driving force for Rockaway, that we just don't like sitting still.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't do it if you weren't like that, really, because I come up here enough to know there's always something to do, something presenting.
And it is a full-time job. It's probably 2 or 3 full-time jobs all in one. It's your whole life, and because we live here as well, so there's very little separation. There's very little work-life separation, if any at all. And we do Airbnb from our home, so like, when does your work stop or start? And it is something that's come up in conversations with people. People say like, "Oh, you work too much," and one thing or another, and you kind of like, well, you do work all the time, but you do something that you like doing. So, and I'm not saying I love everything, absolutely everything I do. There's, there are tasks and chores that are a lot less pleasant, or you enjoy less.
Okay, so that's where we left it. No doubt Marta went off to fulfil many of the duties and obligations she has to attend to as part of Rockaway. If you want to listen to any more stories of the fascinating and interesting people and stars that work, live and pass through the Rockaway firmament, head this way again for another Sounds of Unrest podcast.